Okay, welcome back. We are about ready to start our voting. Today is still Thursday, March 23rd. You have two voting lists in front of you. We're actually going to start with voting list 21, which is the blue voting list and has David's name beside a lot of bills on the first page. So should we start with you,
Yeah,
David?
we'll explain what you have in front of you. You have two voting lists, as the chair said, one's blue, one's yellow. The blue is our identical cross-filed bills that passed unanimously by the Senate. So they're on a consent calendar. So we've researched these, we've looked at them all, and they're all in the same posture as the Senate bill that passed the Senate unanimously. So normally you would just take these all up at once, and that would be that. As a consent calendar, yes.
You can absolutely ask a question. Senator Kramer.
Would we have, and I would hope that there is no reason to believe under the circumstances of what these bills are and the way they passed, I guess on both sides, that the exact same, hopefully, lists of Senate bills are on the other side and in the same posture, ready to come passing out of the House.
Well, it's hard to say since, they're
in different committees.
Yes. And there's no, you can take action now and then. We don't have to necessarily report these to the floor just yet. But, there's probably at least three different committees might be on this list. So it's hard to figure out exactly what's going.
Got it. All right. Well, I would move favorable as a consent calendar, Madam Chair.
Okay, we have a motion and a second for a favorable on this consent calendar listed as voting list 21. I'm going to hold on that motion and second for a minute just to make sure everybody has had a chance to look at all 4 pages that are in front of you. Okay, so Senator Beidle.
So will this also be a consent calendar on the floor?
It'll probably be a couple consent calendars. We're not going to put them all in one. Yes, yes.
Thank you.
That's the whole idea. And that's something the Senate does that the House does not do.
Thank you. Senator Reedy.
Is this going to be a consent calendar in the House committees that they're in for the cross files?
I'm not sure I followed.
I think that's the question that was just asked, and I think the response was because we share jurisdiction with ECM, HGO, and some appropriations personnel, it may not translate as a.
It's impossible to know if they're going to move them today, for example.
Yes, but you don't, again, this doesn't necessarily have to be this is just to get it out for the committee. It doesn't necessarily have to go to the floor yet.
That's fine. And I'm not overly worried. There's like a delegation bill on here for mine that I want to keep moving. I don't really care if my version of it gets passed, but I was just curious if we knew what was going on. But you're right. Of course, it's across 3 other committees, so it's hard to. Okay, thank you.
Senator Kramer.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I was just over, unfortunately, I missed the entirety of our bill hearings today over in the House. But while I was over there, I did discover that there were a number of our colleagues from the minority party in the House that were looking, I think, to have all kinds of questions and discussion at my bill hearing about things that had nothing to do with the bill at hand. And I would say that was a consequence of the conversation we had on the floor yesterday. And I don't know to what level they are looking to take this as perhaps punishment. But they were all united in how they were addressing my bill before them, taking turns. And I just didn't know if maybe if this goes to the next level. I see some of the folks who were the ringleaders have bills on this voting list, and I just didn't know if maybe it would be appropriate to maybe ensure that if this does go to the next level, that, sure.
Okay, let me just say this. I brought this voting list number 21 before you. If there's unreadiness, I don't want to get into the motives of who did what to who for how many
Right.
cookies. If there's unreadiness on this voting list, I absolutely have no problem with us holding this voting list.
For a couple of
We,
days.
but I think it was your motion that was second.
It was. It was. But then I
I'm
looked a
just
little,
being clear.
I would withdraw that motion,
Okay.
maybe just to give a couple more days,
Yeah,
Madam
and
Chair,
like I
Chair, to
said,
get a
wait,
handle on.
Senator, if there is a desire to withdraw the motion and the second, we can hold this voting list. And I would just like to refrain from
I hear you.
speculations about particular bills or particular people. We're on the blue voting list. So is there consensus, Senator Mounts?
Couldn't we vote the list and then if there was a problem, maybe hold the bill to the floor? Or is that bad?
It's just hold the list.
Well,
I
we
don't know.
could, but we'll be back again every day. So there's
Right,
really,
yeah.
we'll be here all the next 18 days. Okay, so I'm hearing unreadiness and the motion has been withdrawn. So I'm seeing nods. You all would like to hold voting list number 21. Done. Okay,
And then the next list is, well, these are bills that are cross files, but you take them up individually because they had folks on the Senate floor who disagreed. So you can address, the bills on the next list on each of their own merit. Yeah, one at a time.
okay, so let's first take up, Patrick, are you ready on Senate Bill 530?
So Senate Bill 530, again, this is the MAIF bill that had some discussion in yesterday's voting session, and a reprint was distributed. I think Senator Kramer asked for some time to review the amendments, and Senator Klausmeyer has been reviewing amendments as well and having some feedback during that time. And so what I've done is I've actually circulated an updated set of amendments that reflects a change. And so if you recall yesterday, that the amendments essentially had three parts to them. One had some technical changes that were requested by the Maryland Insurance Administration relating to the process that they're going to follow in accessing these overcharge funds that we've talked about that have been on the books. The second piece of it would limit the funding from the uninsured motorist penalties. The additional funding that would go to MAIF, the amendments would limit that to fiscal year 2024 only. And then the third piece, which was the topic of conversation, I think Senator Beidel had raised some questions about it. These were amendments that would only allow motor vehicle insurance carriers to recover the assessment costs through rate filings instead of through the surcharge on the policy. And so Senator Klausmeyer has decided to offer a substitute set of amendments that would take that out and leave in place the current law, which allows a carrier to be able to recover those costs through the surcharge on the policy as a line item, or else through their rate filings, at whatever they elect to do. So before you is the reprint that reflects that change. And from what I understand, with that piece out, there are no objections to the set of amendments that you have in front of you.
Thank you. Senator Lamb.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a quick follow-up question for council on that last provision then. I know the House has passed a version over, right? Does this not? No, they have not.
Correct. They have not
Oh.
passed a version of this bill yet in the House.
Oh, I see. Okay. Sounds good.
This is the Senate.
This is Senate Bill 530, the Senate bill. They have not yet.
Okay, you have before you the amendments and Senate Bill 530. Madam Vice Chair?
Wondering, we still have this other amendment. Is that right, Patrick?
I recirculated a set of amendments that took out that amendment. So the committee is acting on the set of amendments without that one. Yes.
So it will be the line item then.
So the amendments Yes, so the line item option will now be available to insurance carriers in recovering their costs from assessment, which is the current law.
Okay, so we just vote on these particular amendments that we have.
Correct, correct,
Okay, and don't worry about that other one.
correct,
Okay.
correct.
Hey, so you have a motion and a second for a favorable on the reprint of Senate Bill 530 that you have in front of you with the amendments. Are there any questions? All those in favor of Senate Bill 530 as amended, raise your hand. Okay, that bill receives a unanimous favorable with amendments report. Madam Vice Chair.
I would just like to thank everybody that worked on this. It's been a long, long time coming, but it's, they have kept me apprised of it, every step of the way, and I appreciate both sides. So thank you all.
Okay, now the rest of the bills that we have before us on the yellow voting list, number 20, are House bills. We can have council walk through those House bills or not. Senator Reedy.
You know, I think in the interest of the weighty issues on this, we should just hold all of these bills till we're sure they're passing our Senate bills, don't you think?
Any other thoughts?
Yeah, good.
I'm okay with this list if you want to go. Good vote.
So I think that what we're gonna do, since we have the list in front of us and we have council here ready to present these bills, is to go ahead and hear the posture that the bills are in the House. I think most of them are in this, all of them are in the same posture. But let's do a quick run through of these and see if there's readiness on any of the bills that you have in the list in front of you without prejudice. All right? Okay, Patrick.
House Bill 279, Prescription Drug Affordability Board upper payment limits. The bill is identical. The House bill is identical to the Senate bill that was passed out of this chamber. This is the bill that reinstates provisions of law regarding the authority of the Prescription Drug Affordability Board to set upper payment limits.
Okay, I have a motion and a second for a favorable on House Bill 279. Are there any questions? All those in favor indicate by raising your hand. Okay, those opposed? That's 1, 2. Okay, so we had 8, 4, 2 against. That bill passes with an 8-2 favorable. Next bill.
House Bill 705, the right to the Declaration of Rights, right to reproductive freedom. This is the proposed constitutional amendment, if approved by the voters, the next general election, that would establish an individual's fundamental right to reproductive freedom, including but not limited to the ability to make, effectuate decisions to prevent, continue, and end one's own pregnancy, and it prohibits the state from directly or indirectly denying, burdening, or abridging the right unless justified by a compelling state interest achieved by the least restrictive means. Again, identical to the Senate bill that was passed out of this chamber.
Okay, have a motion and a second for a favorable on House Bill 705. I don't see any questions. So all those in favor, raise your hand. That's 8 favorable. Those opposed, raise your hand. And that's 2. That bill receives a favorable report on an 8-2 vote. Next bill.
House Bill 812, this is the reproductive health services, protected information and insurance requirements. This is the bill that establishes protections relating to the disclosure of information about reproductive health care by health information exchanges and electronic health networks. I'd also make some clarifying changes regarding insurance coverage provisions. And it's identical to the Senate bill that passed out of this chamber.
Second.
Have a motion and a second for a favorable on House Bill 812. Are there any questions, any discussion? Okay, moving on with the favorable motion, all those in favorable rate. All those in favor, raise your hand. That's 8 in favor. Those opposed, raise your hand. That is 2. That bill receives a favorable report, 8-4-2 against. Next bill.
Next bill is House Bill 48, which is identical to Senate Bill 101, which did pass the Senate unanimously earlier this session. So the bill repeals the collaborative care pilot program and instead requires reimbursement through Medicaid for services provided in accordance with the collaborative care model statewide.
Have a motion and a second for a favorable on House Bill 48. Are there any questions? Okay, all those in favor, raise your hand. That bill receives a unanimous favorable report. We'll move to the next bill.
House Bill 278 is identical to Senate Bill 213, which passed the Senate unanimously earlier this session. Bill authorizes a clinical nurse specialist to practice as a clinical nurse specialist for the purposes of prescribing drugs and durable medical equipment.
Have a motion and a second for a favorable on House Bill 278. I don't see any questions or discussion. All those in favor of that favorable motion, raise your hand. Okay. That was 9. Those opposed and 1. So that bill receives a favorable report, 9-1.
Do you want to?
And we're going to hold the next bill and go to House Bill 902.
House Bill 902 is identical to Senate Bill 839, which passed the Senate unanimously earlier this session. The bill establishes that a hernia caused by repetitive trauma may be considered an occupational disease and may therefore be compensable subject to current standards related to occupational diseases.
We have a motion and a second for a favorable on House Bill 902. Any questions or discussion? All those in favor, raise your hand. Okay, that's 9. That's 10. That bill receives a unanimous favorable report. We'll move to the next bill on page 2.
Okay. Next bill on page 2 is 505. If you recall, this is regarding final inspections of elevators installed in single-family homes. The bill is identical to the Senate bill.
Have a motion and a second for a favorable. I was the floor leader on this bill. I remember this. We have a motion and a second for a favorable on House Bill 505. Any questions or discussion? Senator Reedy?
I think the council said this, but this is identical to what we passed, correct?
It's identical to what
Okay.
you passed, yes.
Thank you.
They voted against it, yeah.
Okay, so we have a motion and a second for a favorable on House Bill 505. Seeing no further discussion, all those in favor, raise your hand. That is 8. Those opposed, raise your hand. That is 2. That bill receives a favorable report, vote 8-2. Next bill, please.
Next bill is House Bill 777. This is from the Attorney General's office. If you recall, this requires each licensed cigarette wholesaler to submit complete and accurate information in the form and manner that the comptroller's office requires to facilitate compliance with reporting requirements. The House, like the Senate, struck the penalty from the bill. The bills are identical.
Have a motion and a second for a favorable on House Bill 777. Are there any questions, any discussions? All those in favor of the favorable, raise your hand. That is 8. Those opposed, raise your hand. That is 2. That bill receives a favorable report, vote 8-2. Next bill.
Next bill is House Bill 775. This is also from the Attorney General's office. This is the anti-price gouging bill. It requires that a person selling an essential goods and service for a price that exceeds a specified threshold under a state of emergency by the governor. The House amended the bill identical to the Senate, which requires the governor to specify which goods and services are essential. And the bill is identical to the Senate bill.
Have a motion and a second for a favorable on House Bill 775. Senator Mounts.
We also added an amendment here in committee.
The amendment you added in committee is also on the House bill.
Well, okay, thank you.
There any further discussion? Questions? Have a motion and a second for a favorable on House Bill 775. All those in favor, raise your hand. That is 9. Those opposed, raise your hand. That is 1. That bill receives a favorable report, 9-1. That is the last bill on the voting list that we have before us. Please stay tuned for announcements regarding our next voting session. With that, thank you all very much for a hard working week, and I'll see some of you later.